And Jess, can you admit people as they join? Okay, just want to stay on time. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our science policy panel. I'm going to introduce our panelists today and then we'll jump into questions. So first we have Dr. Erin Cadwallader. So Dr. Erin Cadwallader leads the Entomological Society of America's science policy and advocacy efforts. She is a key liaison between ESA and many allied groups and leads the Vector-Borne Disease Network, VBDN, a coalition in which UCR is an important member. Before joining the ESA staff, Erin worked with ESA for several years as the leading voice for the organization on Capitol Hill as an external consultant and lobbyist. While her background is in biomedical research, she transitioned from the bench to the science policy community in DC nearly a decade ago and has worked on a wide range of advocacy issues related to scientific research and workforce development, higher education, and social justice for organizations such as Research America, the Association for Women in Science, and Lewis Burke Associates, LLC. She is passionate about the importance of evidence-based policymaking and ensuring science and research are part of the conversation. Erin earned her bachelor's degrees in biochemistry and molecular biology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and her PhD in neurobiology and anatomy from the University of Utah. Next, we have Dr. Marianne Lane, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Entomology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, with an affiliation position in the Department of Mechanical Science and Engineering. Her lab, the Elaine Bioinspiration Collaborative, ABC Lab, studies the multifunctionality of materials associated with insects, such as cicadas, flies, beetles, and leafhoppers. The lab also studies the biomechanics of the click beetle jump. Insights from the ABC Lab's fundamental research have informed the engineering of multifunctional materials and robotic systems. Marianne has also been an active member of the world's largest entomological professional society, the Entomological Society of America. She will serve in the presidential line of the society from 2020 through 2024, serving as president in 2022 to 2023. Throughout her career, Marianne has been committed to science communication and science policy and was an ESA Science Policy Fellow from 2014 to 2016, advocating for entomology at the federal level with the mission to promote opportunities for entomologists globally and enable them to share their science. Marianne has also been a driving force for ESA and the entomology department on the Illinois campus to nurture entomologists' creativity by supporting innovation. She has shown a strong commitment to enhancing diversity, inclusion, and equity in science by co-developing ESA's Code of Conduct Statement serving the Ento Allies program and refining ethics and misconduct policies. Marianne grew up in the Netherlands, but moved to the US to attend college. She earned her bachelor's degrees in integrative biology from the University of California, Berkeley, her master's in entomology from the University of California, Riverside, and her PhD in entomology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And next we have Dr. Sheila Morita, who is trained as an entomologist with a background in plant-insect interactions and evolutionary biology. After transferring to UCR to complete her Bachelor's of Science in Biology, she worked on fire ecology, studying mycorrhizal fungi and desert plant diversity, conducted seed predator research, worked in ecological genetics, and was an entomologist for biodiversity and pollination studies. During graduate school at the UC Davis Population Biology Graduate Group, Sheila researched the potential co-diversification of long-tongued fly pollinators with the South African flora with support from a US student Fulbright Fellowship to South Africa. As a Fulbright, she won the Amy Beale Award for Best Fulbright Student to South Africa in 2002. At North Carolina State University, Sheila became co-PI on a 6-year NSF PEAT grant that trained 3 new systematic biologists. Following an NSF International Research Fellowship to South Africa, she returned to the Smithsonian Natural History Museum as a research collaborator. From 2012 to 2014, Sheila was an AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow with the USDA Biotechnology Regulatory Services, and as a policy analyst for the National Nanotechnology Coordination Office on behalf of the White House National Nanotechnology Initiative. After 3 years as an executive secretary for the Office of Science and Technology policy, Sheila joined USDA's plant protection and quarantine in 2016 as a trade director for Canada and parts of Central America. She now serves as assistant director for all certification-based offshore pest mitigation programs. Thank you for joining us today. So I guess we'll get started with Erin. And the first question is, could you tell us a little bit about how you arrived at your current position?
Happy to explain. I mean, I think as a framing, it helps if you understand that I got every job I've had in DC because I already knew somebody. And that's like my one, if you take anything away from this conversation, it's that networking is really important. And you don't know when you're meeting somebody who might wind up being your future boss. I have a myriad range of stories about these opportunities and how I wound up at them. But for my current position, as it was mentioned, I worked at Lewis Burke Associates, and ESA was one of my clients. Lewis Burke is a lobbying and consulting firm that works with universities and scientific societies. UC Riverside was actually one of our clients during Mike Pisani's tenure at Riverside as the vice president for research. And as a consequence, we work very closely with our clients and really develop strong relationships with them. And so with ESA, when the past executive director departed, Chris Stelzig, who had occupied the position that I now hold, became the executive director and asked me to consider coming and working in-house. And ordinarily, that's actually a huge no-no. I had signed a non-compete that said I would not go work for any clients. And under any other circumstances, there weren't any clients that I would have considered leaving Lewis Burke for. I really liked my job there. I worked with great people, and I really didn't want to aggravate my bosses by leaving and doing something they'd explicitly told me not to do. So I talked to the current president and said, look, any other organization, I wouldn't consider leaving, but I actually have become so invested in what ESA does. I believe so strongly in their mission, and I'm so passionate about the science, even though I'm not an entomologist by training, that I would really appreciate the opportunity to be released from my contract and accept this job offer. And so the folks I worked with at Lewis Burke were great about it and were kind enough to release me from it, even though I'm sure they're concerned it sets a bad precedent in the future. I mean, actually, the University of Illinois is one of our clients as well, who I worked very closely with. So that's kind of how I wound up in this role. And it took about a month to work through all the negotiations. I think I lost about 10 pounds in the process. I was so stressed out about it, but it's worked out really well. And I've been very happy since then with this new opportunity.
Thank you. Marianne?
Well, let me say that ESA is very happy to have you, very lucky to have you. I'm Mariana Aline. I'm an assistant professor at Illinois. So I'm an assistant professor, even though my gray hair shows you that I'm not the youngest assistant professor. I've been actually at Illinois for 15 years prior to accepting this job. I was a research scientist in the entomology department. But my research, and I'm trained as an insect physiologist. I actually worked with Nancy Beckich at Riverside, and then moved, I studied insect parasitoids here at Illinois. Because of a spousal hire thing, we just stayed here, and I got this position as a research scientist. And then after a while, I completely changed my research direction, also had done a lot of teaching, and I got offered this assistant professor position. And I decided to accept it, and nothing really has changed. I've always had students. I've always tried, worked hard to try to get funding and so on and so on. The science policy part is because I've been involved in ESA since I was a graduate student at Riverside, and I think my first meeting was 1995. And as I was going through the, moving up along the ranks, at some point I was a program chair, co-chair, and I worked closely with President Wiedemann, who was influential in starting this science policy program at ESA. And I was really interested in how they decided to go about it. And then I decided to apply for the inaugural class for science. I've always been interested in politics, and so I decided to do that. It was a wonderful experience. I'm doing a little bit less now, but I think as I become president, it's going to be a bigger part of my job. And I'm looking forward, like my meeting is, my meeting for when I'm president is going to be in DC. So I already know what my topic is going to be, my main theme. And Erin and I have already talked about it a little bit. So yeah, it's going to be front and center, science policy.
Great, thank you. And Sheila?
So the question is how did I end up in the job that I'm in? So I think all of my career, I've sort of followed my next interest, and it usually has to do with the people that I work with. So who you know is really important. So from, like, for instance, when you were reading my biography, I had a job working for the Forest Service doing pollinations. And I found out about a job in the mycorrhizal biology lab where they were studying fire ecology. And that made me really interested. I met somebody else that was doing volunteer work somewhere else. And then I ended up working out on the Channel Islands, doing pollination work. And at UC Davis, I probably had 2 or 3 different projects that I was working on. And I started moving from plant ecology more towards insect ecology. I wanted to study phylogeography, and the molecular tools were better for that at the time. Brought me somehow to South Africa just on a whim. The scientist there said, yeah, sure, you can come work with me with these long-tongue flies, just bring your own funding. So then I applied, and then I ended up getting the NSF research fellowship and a Fulbright. So, I mean, it's just like, I think that if you really follow your interest, it's amazing the connections that you can make and how you end up in places. So I was on my 6th year postdocing with an office at the Natural History Museum downtown here in DC. And I don't know, I was looking for other avenues. I know that I was being in DC, you kind of absorb all the things political that are happening around you. And a major frustration of mine is always, well, that doesn't sound right. Of course, the science says this. Why aren't they doing it that way, right? And I had friends who had done the AAAS fellowship. So that's the American Association for the Advancement of Science. They publish Science Magazine, and they have several other fellowships dealing with science and communication and science in the media. So if you're interested in any of that, you should definitely look into it. So I applied to that and ended up my first gig at USDA, APHIS. That's the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, where I work now. And I have to say, when I started working there, I was just amazed. Just the professionalism of the people that were there, the diversity of the people that were there. So, I mean, I got to say, the diptera floor at Natural History, full of a lot of white men that are a lot older than me, you know. But here there was it was like a cross section of the city and diversity of beliefs, political and religious, and a very, very professional attitude to the work environment, and a very strong professional development culture. So, you know, they had like all kinds of leadership workshops, and I think the first thing I remember when it really hit me is that when they had an LGBT seminar that you could go to, and I'm like, this organization feels like it's important enough to pay for me to sit here and listen to this lecture. You know, that's the kind of organization that I want to work for. So my second year of my fellowship, I did at the Nanotechnology Coordination Office, where I ended up working for 3 years, but I always wanted to come back. And when I saw this trade job, international trade in the plant protection and quarantine, which is where I am now, it was like a dream come true. And so I worked in Canada with Canada for 4 years, I'd say. And it was fantastic. As far as travel, I was the only country you could pretty much drive to. So I know my other colleagues were like going to Bangladesh or whatever, but I had some really great relationships with my Canadian colleagues. But now I'm an assistant director for all the offshore programs. So these are programs where we work with the local countries and their industry to run sort of greenhouse sites or treatment facilities or whatever to try to keep all of the pest mitigation offshore before it comes to our ports. And a lot of some of those programs, we have APHIS staff there. Like there's a lot of mangoes that come from Central America. We have APHIS staff that are doing this hot water dip for fungus. But there are also a lot of programs where if somebody sets up a greenhouse, we go and audit it, say, yes, you're part of the program. We go every year and audit it. They keep their certification and it allows them to do imports into the country safely. So those are the programs that I'm in charge of. But I don't know, I feel like in general, it was kind of a sanguine path, always kind of following my interest, but I'm never bored and always happy.
Thank you. I think that's been a trend where people follow their interests and end up in a position they love. So to our audience, if you have questions, please feel free to put that in the chat. And as you're thinking of questions, I'll go on to the next one. So what does a typical day look like for you? So what are some duties and responsibilities you have? How does the work-life balance look in your current position? And whoever wants to go first can take it.
I'm happy to kick things off. So in both my current job and the past ones I've held in DC and policy, I feel like there's really no typical day besides saying I answer a lot of emails, I sit in a lot of meetings, and then I spend the rest of the day at the end trying to wrap up all of the emails that I missed or hadn't responded to, along with trying to move whatever the bigger projects are along. But in terms of who I meet with, it's everybody from Capitol Hill staff, ESA members and some of the committees that I'm involved with, federal agency folks. Actually, Sheila, I realized I should touch base with you on something I'm working on grant challenges. And yeah, so I'll be following up with you afterwards. And as part of it, it sort of depends on what the work I'm doing is. So my responsibilities fall into a couple of different buckets. And one of them is the science policy portfolio, which includes the science policy fellows that Em talked about. And that's how we met Sheila originally, because we had invited her to come speak to the group a couple of years ago. So it's a very small world in DC. And that's both a great thing and sometimes some source of confusion at times as well. One of the challenges with science policy is that it does not generate revenue. And so if you're thinking about working for an association that does policy, understand that you will be a drain on the budget. And so sometimes you will be involved in trying to figure out how to help creatively fundraise for it. And so that's the other part of what I do, is the strategic initiative side of things. And that's focused on trying to create new programs that help us then subsidize many of the other activities that we do. And that takes a couple of different forms. And that's an area I don't have as much experience in, so I'm sort of learning as I go, which is exciting and interesting and a little scary too. But again, I think you'll hear from all three of us that we never have boring days because there's always something new and exciting and we're always learning new things. I also oversee the certification program. So if you're familiar with our ACE or BCE programs, that falls into my jurisdiction, but I have staff beneath me that I manage that are focused on that. So also making sure that everything's progressing there. We're launching a new program later this year, so we're trying to get that off the ground too. So I think that kind of covers sort of what any day I'm working on all of those different things, trying to keep all of these different balls that we're juggling in the air and trying not to drop any of them on a regular basis.
Yeah, so I actually won't take up too much time because I think I have the type of job that you're probably most familiar with as an assistant professor. I spend a lot of time emailing, a lot of time in meetings, a lot of time trying to write proposals, to managing a lab. Well, actually, I don't do much managing a lab because my lab has been renovated for the past year. And because of COVID, it's taking forever. So I'm sitting in my teenage son's room. This is my day. But I do think I have a couple of other things that I do that maybe you might not know from your own advisor. On campus and within the department, since the summer, a lot more time spent on DEI projects, be they within the department, in my college or the university. It's taking a lot of time, and that's fine. a lot of teaching, different kind of teaching now in a pandemic, which also takes a lot of time. Rethinking what higher education is going to be like after the pandemic. That's actually kind of a fun working group I'm in part of. And then, you know, all the ESA stuff, which is really ramping up. I'm on the governing board now, but then going into the presidential line means that you have to go to publications meetings and you have to go to DEI meetings and you go. So yeah, that's taking a lot of time, and especially as an assistant professor, it's a kind of a weird position to be in. But otherwise, I think you're probably familiar with what a professor does.
I guess that leaves me, and I also see some questions in the chat. So I'm going to answer Hannah's question first, and then Hannah, is it okay if I answer the chat questions after that?
Yes. Can I just read them just to, because not everyone can see the chat questions?
Okay. Well, then I'll wait. I'll go ahead and do the what's your typical day, and then I'll let you deal with the questions.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, my typical day in the office. Everybody nowadays sits in front of a computer all day and reads emails, and is in video conferences, right? But I guess what we're dealing with on a typical day, for me anyway, is managing the programs that we have offshore, making sure that we are meeting the needs of our stakeholders, which are industry and the American public. So our mission is to facilitate safe trade, meaning that we can trade in agricultural products without pests and disease. And to safeguard American agriculture and natural resources. So trying to make sure that we don't get diseases and pests coming from outside while we're doing that trade. So the facilitation part is really important, not just to the exporters that are exporting to the United States. So for instance, Guatemala exports a lot of flowers, pelargonium flowers, in fact, which are a host for a select agent that is a pest of potatoes. So we have a huge program overseas, all these huge nurseries that grow pelargonium plants. Pelargoniums are basically geraniums. They're really big on Mother's Day, lots of different pinks and purples. And you might think, oh, well, this is Guatemala's industry, this is Guatemala's economy. And yes, it's really important to the stability of that country, but the pass-on economy, so once those are imported, they're rerouted and grown up in the United States, and the resale value is like $6 billion. So a lot of time, we actually had an incident last year where we had a detection of this select agent in one of our programs, and there was this huge domestic response to try to eradicate, find out what greenhouses it went to, working with the different states and everything, and then also working with the facility to try to do a trace back and figure out what happened. So I feel like there is a lot of like sort of reactionary work in the work that I'm doing, but like it's never boring. Sometimes we do get a breath where we can do some strategic planning. Like one of the things that we're working on is trying to modernize how we collect data. We initiated a few programs where we're doing risk-based sampling. So based on the risks associated with that particular commodity, country, and shipper combination, we can reduce inspection rates at the border, which is great for everybody. I think what do I do? So yeah, lots of meetings. Generally trying to monitor the major programs that we have are our offshore certification programs for things like greenhouse cuttings, also like bell peppers in Central America. You know the orchids that you see when you walk in the grocery store, those are the Phalaenopsis and growing media. A lot of those come from Thailand. Those are part of our programs where they have to do specific things with the growing media in order to make sure that it's pest-free before it comes in. We have military pre-clearance programs. So when the military moves around the world, they might go to Afghanistan, and then when they come back, all of their baggage and their personal effects and tanks that they all have to be inspected, make sure that they don't bring anything in. We have international agreements with several Asian countries up for the Asian gypsy moth, because one of the problems that we have is that these big cargo ships, if they have their lights on so many miles offshore, they tend to attract gypsy moths, which lay their eggs onto the ships. And so these agreements are for trapping and monitoring, and also education, trying to, get them to, through certification programs, get the ships to stop turning on their lights offshore, stuff like that. So I guess in general, I really love my job as far as science policy is concerned, because I feel like this kind of regulatory work is where the rubber meets the road with the science and policy. So it's like we're actually using the science to try to design policy. So like it's never just the science too. That's something that took me a while to really get in my brain as the beginning as a AAAS fellow. It's like it's not just numbers, because you also have to deal with the stakeholders and their livelihoods, their personal values. Certain social things might be a little bit more important compared to, I don't know, what have you. Like the vaccine distribution, I think, is a good example. The world is full of people and not numbers. So
thank you.
I'm going to start rambling, so I should let you take over with your questions, Hannah.
Thank you. No worries. So we have an audience question. So for Sheila, can you talk more about your AAAS fellowship experience? And then for Marianne, can you talk more about your experience as an ESA Science Policy Fellow? And then maybe for Erin, like what kinds of skills and background do you look for when you're, I guess, looking at the applications for the Science Policy Fellows?
Do you want us to go in that order?
Sure, yes, let's go in that order.
Yeah, so I guess I think it took about 6 months for me to really understand what I was doing as a policy fellow, because of course I came in as a scientist, as a pure scientist. And I think as a scientist, you're on a quest for truth, right? When you're doing science policy, you're trying to do the best effective, like you need something to function. So you need to try and balance what can you do with what's optimal. And biotechnology regulatory services, they regulate genetically engineered organisms. So plants and viruses and things like that. But there is a huge distrust in the public perception of risk there. And it's funny, when I went to the nanotechnology office, that's another emerging technology where there's a public perception of the risk that is more sort of, I guess, benefit focused, unless it comes to food. So people think, oh, we can do that. We have the nano coating on our phone, so I can drop it in the tub now, or whatever. But then when they find out that there's nano-sized particles of titanium in their white sugar on their donuts, everyone freaks out. Oh my God, there's nanoparticles on my donut. When there's a lot more in a donut that can hurt you than nanoparticle-sized powdered sugar. So that was really, I think what happened, somebody came and gave a talk, also a former fellow, and there's kind of like a fellows network throughout the government. And he was talking about how, imagine somebody's going on a trip and you're helping them coordinate and you want to help them find a venue for dinner. I think a scientist's approach might be, what are all the restaurants in this city? And you could organize them by kind and price or whatever, and then you give the list to the person. And a policy sort of approach would be like, okay, we're going to make some assumptions. We know that they probably don't like Chinese and they have a lot of people, so we need a larger venue. Maybe one is a vegetarian or something. I'm going to give them 4 choices, 4, right? So you limit the number of decisions that they have to make using a little bit of your knowledge, right? So I was like, oh, I think I get it now. And it's like whenever you have to write a decision memo or something like that, or take information and distill it into little like talking points, that's where that kind of thinking comes in handy. Because I mean, there is the all truth and the all knowing, but there's never perfect information and we still need to move forward. So my experience as a fellow was awesome. I still have that network of people. It's a 2-year program. Well, actually, it's a 1-year program with the option to renew for a second year. People often stay at the same organization for both years. And the application are due in November, so you should apply. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, thank you. And then Marianne, for your experience as a science policy fellow.
Okay, so I was in the inaugural class, so that was in 2014, and I was a little bit involved in the lead up to the program. And you know, one of the things the people in charge, the presidential line was and governing board was considering was a program like AAAS. But that is a very costly thing for a society like ESA. So then you could only reach maybe one person every 1 year, every 2 years or so. So they decided on this completely, it's a different program, right, than AAAS, and it has pros and cons. So what you do is you go twice in a non-pandemic time, you go twice a year to DC, and you learn everything about the federal level legislations, like how that works, but also you learn about the agencies. I actually learned a lot about NSF and NIH and USDA when I went there. And you also have maybe programs where you meet with people at NGOs. So it was wonderful. I was especially impressed by visiting, and again, this is before 2016, right? So things were different. So the Office of Science and Technology was like really, I just love that place. It seemed like so invigorating. There were scientists there. They were interested in pollination and how to get to Mars and all that stuff. So it was really, really nice time to be there, even though I'm not a US citizen. So I had to have like somebody who went with me everywhere, like including to the bathroom. So that was a little weird. But anyway, it was a great experience and I learned a lot. After that, you're still involved in science policy. I became also a member of the Science Policy Committee for ESA, which also you can be on even if you've never been a fellow. And there I learned how to write these policy statements that Sheila also mentioned. And that's where you learn to really, okay, what's the message? Who's going to read this? How are they going to perceive this, which I want to convey? And that's where I also learned a lot by being on these committees. I was actually on one for the collections one, the statement, which is I am not a systematist or a taxonomist, but they wanted me on that. So I was, the perfect, I just knew enough to be dangerous. And the whole time I was like, shorter, because the 3 other guys, they were all guys, they were like, oh, we can go on and on about why collections are important. And I was like, nobody's going to read it. It has to be 2 pages or less. So, so anyway, that's where I learned a lot about that. And now still, there's certain topics that come up, and but since I'm on the governing board, there's certain, and now in the executive committee, like there's a lot of letters going out, showing lawmakers, hey, we are here too. If you need any help, this is the kind of advice we can give you as ESA, and that's been, I love reading those. Erin does all the work, but we just have to sign at the end. That's been exciting too. Something I really would encourage people more is once you have these tools to then maybe use them also at the state level, which is probably even more influential, but it's just something that ESA can get involved in that would be just too much. But once you have these skills that you get through the Science Policy Fellowship program or by serving on the Science Policy Committee, then maybe taking it to your state capital and working with people there. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And then for Erin, what are some background and skills that you look for in Science Policy Fellows?
I want to first build off of what Em was saying, which is that part of the point of the Science Policy Fellows is really to build a grassroots network. So we really want people to participate who are going to then figure out how to help engage other entomologists. We think you guys are one of the best aligned disciplines when it comes to outreach, because so much of what you guys do involves talking to people at different levels. My background's in biomedical research. We tend to be terrible at talking to other people about our work because nobody knows how to avoid jargon, and we don't do anything that trains us in that as part of our academic training, where a lot of what you guys do is really geared towards helping people understand how to utilize the findings of your field. So that's my little plug. Like, you guys are actually really well equipped already to be engaging in science policy. And one of the things that we do as a part of our program is host Entomology Advocacy Week. And Em has a great training video on our website about how to get more involved. So if you're looking for some ideas about how to connect with your local legislators, because a lot of it is just building relationships. It's making that first point of contact and then figuring out how you can be useful to them. And through that, how to maybe advance the interests of the field by promoting the priorities that we're focused on. But it's really about building relationships and being a resource. And so it's in the middle of August. I forget what the exact dates will be this year. I think it's August 16th to 20th or something like that. But each day we're going to be focused on a different topic. If you saw it last year, we did a different webinar each day, bringing in guest speakers to talk about things that connect with our advocacy that's going on this year. And I think we'll be doing a webinar a day again, and we'll provide information on how to tweet at people, how to make phone calls, how to write emails. And we really encourage you to kind of start thinking about that. And I did that as a graduate student, reaching out when I was in Utah to one of the local offices. Utah has a lot of natural resources. There were a lot of discussions about what should be done to increase gas and other exploitation access to natural lands. And I happen to feel really strongly about protecting wildlife. So I was regularly reaching out to that office to provide my input and offer of expertise and to connect them with other people on campus. And then when I actually got to do an informational interview with somebody from that congressional office, they were like, "Your name sounds so familiar." I was like, "Oh, I think you've probably responded to some of my letters." And they actually do a lot of times have to take the time to respond and read those. So it's not that you're just casting your comments into a void. Okay, so I will step off of that horse and now focus on the question I was asked. So the Science Policy Fellows are not selected by me. I help oversee the process, but I'm actually not directly involved. We have a subcommittee of the Science Policy Committee that helps select people. So we do sort of a two-tier round. We get all of the applications, we review them, and then select the most competitive individuals for interviews. I conduct the interviews as simply the standard, just because that's part of my job. So then those interviews are reviewed a second time around by the subcommittee, and then the decisions are made from that. And so we look for a lot of different things. We look for individuals who have some demonstrated interest already. Part of it's we want to develop people, but it's become so competitive that, frankly, if you have already done something that shows you're interested in this space and have already tried to get some experience, it's helpful because it means you will already come in with a foot up. We look for a wide range of ages. So we're looking for diversity of all types. So that's a factor as well. What stage age are you? We really try to divide it up so that we have enough candidates that we're reflecting the breadth of ESA. This year we wound up having all women as the final pool, and I think we felt sort of bad about that. And then as somebody who's worked for an association focused on women before, it's like, it's strange when the shoe is on the other foot. But we really try to make sure we have diversity also in terms of the sections from ESA that are represented. And we try to, and this doesn't work out perfectly again, because it's still a bunch of other scientists helping evaluate scientists. But that's the general idea. We also look for geographic diversity. We have so many people that wind up moving to North Carolina that our past fellows are disproportionately represented. Like anybody who reaches out from North Carolina, I'm like, please don't. I'm going to vote against you because we have too many people. And so we really want to make sure that we're leveraging our existing fellows that are now alumni because they can still be a resource and help connect where they are geographically. So that's actually a major consideration. And we always put out the map of where we have fellows, hoping that people will look and see, oh, my state's not represented. California, we tend to have pretty good representation from just because it's a big state, but you'll all be moving. So this is a lifelong, career-long opportunity. I also wanted to mention that even though I said I don't select people, I have served on the AAAS Science Policy Fellowship committees in the past. And so what they look for is a little bit different than what I look for. And I also applied for the AAAS fellowship and didn't get it. And I thought that my story for why I was interested is incredibly compelling because it's my story. Of course, I think it's amazing. But what the people reviewing those applications are really looking for are sort of who already has the best resume. So who has the most publications at whatever stage in your career. You know, if you're an undergrad, or not, sorry, not if you're an undergrad, you can only apply if you're a graduate student at the earliest stage. But they're really looking for, you know, who are the standouts in terms of what they've done academically. And there are a lot of things, such as in my experience, where it can impede your ability to be a competitive applicant just because of the way your projects may have turned out. If you've gotten scooped, you may not have many publications. There's a myriad of things that contribute. So they really look very much for those kind of things. And so the more you can position yourself to be as good on paper as possible, that's really what most of those people tend to evaluate. They're far less compelled by other people's personal narratives and reasons for wanting to get into policy. And I think that winds up being problematic because then it turns out a lot of people have never done anything before, and not everybody loves DC. It is a really different climate than academia. So it isn't for everybody. And a lot of people wind up deciding to go back into academics after doing fellowships on Capitol Hill or with the federal agencies. I think more agency people are more likely to stick around. I feel like the Hill people often go back more frequently. But I know a lot who've also stayed. So it's all just kind of a matter of trying to figure out what's the best thing for you. Yeah, exactly.
So Erin, can I just say a little bit about the AAAS selection process?
Yeah.
So I think they definitely are looking for strong scientists. So you've got to have strong scientific background, but they're also looking for people with leadership capacity and interest in, societal issues. So that's all very good. But if you already have a lot of policy experience or a significant amount, that could count against you because they are looking for who will gain the most from the fellowship, given the amount, their scientific prowess and their interests. So Erin, you're probably overqualified on the policy side. But there's no limit on the number of times you can apply. And it's something that they will note in the interview process is if you have applied before. It's always good if you're interested, to reach out to a former fellow and just talk to them and find out about their experience.
There's also no age limit on when you can apply.
That's right. That's totally right. In fact, the panel I was on last year, not this January, but last January, there was a scientist who had a very distinguished career, and he had just retired, and he was like gold to AAAS. So
one of our past science policy fellows who had just retired decided to go back after doing our fellowship and apply for it, and then spent 2 years at USDA and loved it. I also don't think he knows how to retire. Like I don't genuinely think he knows how to fill his time otherwise if he's not committed to actively trying to make the world a better place. So.
So has there been anything in particular that you think made you qualify to move between so many jobs or juggle both academia and science policy?
I'm happy to kick that one off. So I moved jobs not because I was qualified to move between them, but because I really needed to find a new position to learn more. The position I had at Research America was a 3-month-long fellowship, and so I needed to find a full-time one. And I took the job at the Association for Women in Science, which was public policy rather than science policy explicitly focused. And I was reluctant to take it because I wasn't really sure that I was the best person to speak to the issues that they prioritized, which were on Title IX and other things on social justice that I'd never been involved in besides like being a woman. That was basically my only qualification. And women, we tend to think, oh, unless I check every box, I'm really not qualified. So learning to think beyond that and to recognize that as a barrier has been a benefit to me. But really the job was an opportunity to learn new skills. And I think of my career as constantly trying to build the tools for the toolbox to be successful in whatever I want to do when I grow up. I am still not entirely sure what that is, but each step along the way I've taken because it helped me develop new skills. I left AWIS because I knew that I needed a better mentor, but I didn't even know who to talk to or how to find one. And so taking that opportunity helped me really understand how to move the levers to achieve the policy goals that I wanted to fulfill. And I couldn't learn that in my position at AWIS, even though I really loved that job. And so I knew I eventually wanted to go back into the nonprofit space. So when this opportunity presented itself, again, it's not that I'm perfect for it, but I'm growing into the role. And that's really, I think, when scientists are looking for their next position, no matter what it is, you should be looking for something where you will develop in it. You shouldn't already come in with all the qualifications you need to succeed. Otherwise, you'll be bored really fast.
I would say, like, for switching between careers, you really want to think about transferable skills. Because, I mean, that was the main thing that they emphasized to us when we were going through placement interviews for AAAS, is it's not important that you get, if you're a biologist, that you get placed with NIH or USDA. You could just as easily work for the VA or the State Department. Because as a scientist, your transferable skill, the most valuable one you have, is critical thinking and problem solving. So you just really need to think about the places that you're strongest that can be transferred to a new job. And I think also one thing that we probably all have, and one of the things that I feel is really strong in me, is just an intellectual curiosity. So I'm always asking questions, and I'm always curious about the new next thing. So and how it works. So I don't think there's anything specific that you can, I mean, just to think about what your transfer, and also communication is very, very important. Communication skills, writing and public speaking. And networking, as Erin pointed out, is another one.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, I don't know, because my career has been just weird. And I've also been very fortunate that I never had to choose based on being economically secure, right? I've been very fortunate to be part of a team, with my spouse, a team, and we've, he's some superstar. So I feel always really awkward about, making suggestions based on my career path, because I know I've been very fortunate in that way. But yeah, the ability to be able to change, like I changed completely my research direction, and being able and doing bio-inspired design work, which forces me to work with engineers, which is a whole different language. Communication is always important, right? So that is, I think that's probably a strong point of mine, to be honest about, time out, I have no idea what you're talking about, or being okay with showing your vulnerability sometimes, like I don't know what's going on and I need help. But at the same time, just being nice to people, that's always a good one to have, right? Like, don't be that person that is alienating. Yeah, but otherwise, I don't really know what my advice would be on that. The other advice is also that it's okay to not go exactly the trajectory that you've been at. And especially when I was a grad student, I only heard about how to become a professor. And luckily now we've come to realize that there's many other careers. There have to be other careers because there's just not enough professorships. So being able to that it's okay not to go, it's okay to go like this every now and then, right? So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to comment on that, because I know that when I was in graduate school, I just didn't even know what I would do if I wasn't going for a 10-year track, tier 1 university. I also felt like it would be a betrayal to my graduate program or whatever. We're not really taught to think out of that box. And it's important. I'm really glad that you guys are here and that Hannah is hosting these kinds of, meet and greets and panels, because it is important to think about other options. And there are a lot of really great options.
Thank you. How is the relationship between science and policy changing? Have you seen any positive or negative trends in your work?
I would say, from my perspective as somebody who spends a lot of my time working with Capitol Hill and working with congressional staff, things ebb and flow. Things get better and then they kind of get worse and they get better again. And that's not just speaking the last administration versus the current administration. There's all kinds of more subtle changes that happen regarding who's in power and where their priorities lie and where they want to spend money on funding. And I think that overall, the change has been towards the better, right? There's an increasing recognition that climate change is real, that these are global challenges that need to be addressed, and we can't just do it as the US. We need to work effectively as part of the global community. And I think that if you use that example as just one case where things are trending overall, I think in a positive direction, but it takes time, and there's been progress and then there's been steps backwards, that there is an increasing understanding of the importance of science, even as parts of the community reject or receive misinformation and thus have concerns that's not necessarily well-founded. I had a call yesterday talking with another organization that's really focused on gene editing for plants. And they're trying to figure out, how do we get the message out there about the fact that, this is actually a critical thing and we need it for the future of sustainable agriculture in this country. And so we have a lot of these conversations about, where have we made progress? What has been effective in the past as far as messaging goes? And how can we kind of build on those success stories? So I also couldn't get out of bed if it felt like doom and gloom all the time. So I will say that I have to have an optimistic attitude. Otherwise it gets too frustrating. But I think that the changes are happening and that they are positive, and that the more scientists that are participating in panels like this today, where you're learning more about the opportunities that you may not have thought of previously, even if you pursue an academic career for the rest of your life, you'll know a little bit more about what the opportunities are, who to connect with, how to think about these things through a different lens. So I think that there's greater awareness on the scientific community side as well about how to interface in politics. And that's just as important as politicians understanding why science matters.
Yeah, I feel like it's really important, even if you stay in academia, how to communicate your science to others is just, it's so valuable. Trying to explain to somebody how editing the gene of a plant, putting a fish gene in a tomato doesn't make it a fish, or that actually genetic modification of plants has been around since the beginning of agriculture, when you crossbreed things and animals, and trying to just figure out how the best way to communicate something to someone so that they understand is a skill that's really worth developing, not just in the science policy realm, but even in your academic career. So think about the best talks that you've seen at meetings, and they tend to tell a story, right? So you have to really think about how to incorporate that kind of thinking and understanding your audience's values when you're trying to communicate hard scientific facts. I think I'd have to agree that it's an ebb and flow. I couldn't pin it as getting better or worse.
Yeah, for me, the biggest change is the realization of scientists that they need to be more involved. And on the other hand, I also think it's okay to not, like, if you're if you're not good at it, then please don't, don't, and that's okay, but to not deride that others might want to. And so the positive change I see on a campus then is the promotions and tenure package now values these kinds of efforts, whereas in the past it was just research and teaching. Now there's also DEI and science policy, communication, all that stuff is now included. To what extent? that, is it valued is another question, but that's definitely a positive.
That is fantastic to hear. It was something that we talked about when I was in graduate school. It's just, yeah, I can spend time making a database online so people can identify the bumblebees in their backyard, but where's it going to get me with tenure, right?
Yeah, so that's definitely changing, and also I like the way they're doing it. It's also associated oftentimes with a sort of a rubric. It's not like you can't just do DEI by saying, I don't know, I hosted or I was the advisee of 2 graduate students of color, right? Like but it has to be good advising. The whole lab should be welcoming, that kind of stuff, and that's being valued more. So.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. I'm glad that these issues are now in being, recognized in the academic community. So we have another question is, how do you decide which issues are important to give as restaurant options, to continue Sheila's metaphor, to policymakers? So how do you decide on which issues are the most important?
I think that's part of the art of science policy. That's what makes it not necessarily science. And sometimes you've got to make judgment calls, right? So sometimes we need these decisions more quickly. I guess this is a little bit different, but I'm just thinking there's this whole sort of field called trans science, and it's just about really how can we know the truth and how much information is ever enough, right? So we could have the most perfect data as to whether or not some nuclear power plant would be safe if we studied it for 100 years, but we need it in the next 15. So how do we decide? How do we pick which options are most important in making the decision about moving forward? And it's not an easy process, but that's part of the policy decision-making process. I guess it's, something that you learn through experience and also from your colleagues and studying past decision-making that's happened as well.
Yeah, and then, we have the disadvantage. So when we went to Capitol Hill during the Science Policy Fellows visits, we would meet all the people and they would be going like, oh, it's really tough to get a representative to talk to you about. There was doctors that are promoting home visits. There should be more money for home visits for people who can't go to the hospital or something, or to see the doctor. And they were like, well, we're here advocating for insect science. And they were like, oh, okay, at least we don't have to do that, right? So, I mean, we have a tough road ahead, but it's okay. But we also, at the same time, insects are important for so many really important things, like biodiversity and therefore climate change. Food security and therefore climate change, public health and therefore climate change. So I guess climate change is probably really important for all of that. And so it's an easy sell once you have their attention and they understand what you're talking about. So and that's a skill. I'm not necessarily the best at it, but yeah.
I put a link to our ESA tiered agenda for our priorities, which are based on feedback from the community. So hopefully this summer, if I'm able to get around to it, I will be putting out a survey again. We try to do it roughly every 5 years to find out what you guys think really should be the priorities. And then we kind of align that with what do we see as the larger trends happening congressionally, and try to align those two and then really focus our efforts based on that. I don't really think a lot of the priorities will change because these continue to be such important topics. And you can see that just if you're looking at the news, if you're looking at the legislation that's introduced, independent of our advocacy. But those are kind of the big topics we focus on. But I often stress to people that politics is all about compromise. So when you go into these meetings, you're really trying to figure out how can I give the person I'm meeting with what they need? Because they're never just going to say, wow, what you have is really compelling, and I will forsake all of my other priorities, whether it's people coming in and talking about home visits and care like that, on that cost a lot of money, or something that's really small change, but still something that's critical in our perspective. So trying to figure out how to get people to see that you are giving them something they need to solve a problem they maybe, hopefully, are at least aware that they have. That's kind of the real art to me in policy making.
Yeah, Erin, you brought up something that I didn't even think of. I mean, we do a lot of public comment periods. So we gather a lot of feedback from the public on what they value being a public organization. And that's part of how we decide which options are more important for making the restaurant recommendation. So, and that's what Erin's doing with her work and trying to focus the organization. So definitely knowing your stakeholders is super important, and not a word that I even knew before my AAAS fellowship.
So what are some challenges and problems that you see? We kind of touched on this, but just going into the future, what are some challenges and problems you foresee in the field of science policy?
I'm going to say that in 2 years, we're probably going to be facing a huge budget battle. Right now, we are like asking for everything because sequestration, which was implemented under the Budget Control Act, has finally been lifted. So, most of your academic career has been spent under budget constraints that have required a finite amount that goes to non-defense discretionary, which supports all of the federal science agencies. And those have been tough choices and extremely fraught. And so right now, this year, with a Biden administration that's extremely receptive to funding research, the numbers we're seeing coming out are really positive. And as your advocates, we will be pushing for every single dollar that we can get for all of these priorities. But we also know that if there's a flip in the House and Senate, or in the next election cycle, which is very likely based on historical trends. I'm not projecting anything based on current politics, simply the way things tend to work out. That you can expect Republicans will suddenly be extremely budget focused again and conscious about spending. And so we're trying to use these 2 years to set new levels for the agencies that will make it harder for them to cut where we really think investments are most critical, which is in science and technology. There is no place where we get a better return on our investments. So that's the challenge that I see as your advocate on the horizon. And right now we are putting all of our eggs in that basket to try to at least buffer the blowback we are anticipating in the next 2 years.
That clearly is probably the biggest issue. Another issue is probably the general public and therefore policymakers themselves, how they like to have all this information coming in and how do they use it. And on the one hand, you can get discouraged in this day and age by the nonsense that is coming out and how people decide on if they want to take the vaccine or not, for instance, or what how they want to deal with COVID exposure. But at the same time, there's a whole other part of the population who's way more interested in what is mRNA, or like what has science given us? Why did it happen so quickly? That kind of stuff. So information seems like really there's a lot of it, and a lot of it is wrong and or not important for the decision you're trying to make. So how do we educate people, the general public, on that, and therefore policymakers? So that's something I'm more concerned about, because that's more in my wheelhouse, right? How do I teach my students to make those decisions?
I think for me, I think that's a really good point. Humans are really poor risk assessors. It's the very first thing I learned when I was at BRS. So trying to figure out how to convey critical thinking and understanding the source and value of information, especially in this new information age. With there's a lot of data out there, but there's information. Is it really real information? I don't know. My hope, I think, is that I know when my dad got his degree at UCI in computer science and he was interviewing for jobs, they said, "What's that? What's computer science?" I hope someday Like when people say, "Oh, I do science policy," they'll be like, "Oh yeah." They won't be like, "What's that?" So more events like this, getting the word out to people who are in, graduate school, that there are a lot of more options than the tenure track. I think continuing to expand the pipeline, options in the pipeline. I think that's an ongoing challenge that I am hopeful for progress in.
So what were some resources that were instrumental to your success in science policy? So this can be people or books, classes, fellowships.
When I was in undergrad, before Google was a thing or any way of actually like using the internet to find information out about careers in science policy, I connected with people. I talked to 2 advisors that I had that knew what I was interested in. And they helped me connect with some people that had done AAAS fellowships. And so I didn't know anybody in politics. I didn't know even really anybody that had done a PhD besides the people that I worked with in the lab as an undergrad. And I then just started building off of that network initially. And when I was in graduate school, I went to every job talk I could. I tried to find pieces of advice from people that would work well for me. I did informational interviews with anybody I could connect with. Like, I was thinking back on some of the individuals I spoke with, and one was by one of my best friend's husband's ex-girlfriends who'd done a California-based policy fellowship, because it was somebody who could give me some ideas and recommendations and advice. And as I said, so much of my career has come through meeting people, and people talk to me. So it's partly that I talk to everybody, and then just strangers connect with me. I literally got one of these jobs because a stranger on the metro started talking to me and helped me connect with a network of people I never would have had any exposure to, which is what led me to the job at Lewis Burke. So all of it's been really talking to people. There are books out there. There's one that Sean Otto wrote that was really helpful to me. And he's been a great friend since I wrote a book review about his book. And then he invited me to meet him and help him sell books on the NASA campus. And so that gave me entree to scientists that I wouldn't have met previously and the opportunity to talk to him about his perspective. And so a lot of it's just like, yeah, exactly. Emma's holding up one of his books. So much of it's just being open-minded to meeting people and finding out who has information. They don't have to have all of the potential connections for your future, but rather what can you learn from them? What advice do they have? And then figure out how to apply what they've told you in a way that's going to be useful and constructive for you. And then, of course, now there's a lot more resources out there on the internet. So, Googling will get you answers as well. And I know that some universities have classes. There are free online certificates as well. I'm doing one on DEI right now through the University of South Florida. There's a lot out there if you are interested in trying to pursue these and figure out something that works for your level of comfort and interest.
Yeah, for me, it's been my mentor. So for my master's, I was at Riverside with Nancy Beckage, and I guess you guys never got to meet her, but she was a wonderful person and always, introducing me to people and was up for anything I wanted to do. And then another mentor for me has been, I'm in the my department head is May Berenbaum, so science communication is kind of like that's just expected. And then, but my biggest was Rob Wiedemann, who was my PhD advisor, and he was president of VSA during that presidential line where they were guys, all these guys got together and said, okay, we are making science policy one of the main issues that we as a line, rather than just these chunks of 1 year, just like in a 4 or 5 years period, we're going to figure out how to do this and implement it. And so that was really nice to see that people who were my mentors were saying, okay, science policy is important. So yeah.
Yay for May Berenbaum. I saw her at an event on Capitol Hill, and I somehow came up that I was a AAAS fellow, and she told me that she was very proud of me. So I took that to heart. I think it was about the colony collapse disorder and whether or not radio towers and cell phones had anything to do with it.
Right.
But resources instrumental to my success. I think I have to side with Erin in that, like, it's the network that you build, it's people, and don't be afraid to cold call people to do informational interviews. A lot of people are more than happy to do that. I think that's one of the best ways to meet people that are doing things interested to you. I mean, I guess it's kind of like saying, you know, oh, I'd love to hear more about your research, but it doesn't have to be that directed, right? Just informational interviews. You're interested in them, how they got where they are, and you know, asking questions like you're asking of us. And they, you know, often connect you to other people. So I mean, I found that to be very successful for me in finding new directions and opportunities.
I fully agree. And we'll just say, anybody who gives you the time of day to talk about these kind of priorities and their experience and any advice they might have for you, always, always, always make sure to thank them for their time. It's like the most basic thing, but it honestly didn't occur to me when I was in grad school to like send a follow-up thank you email. My parents were horrified when I said that this was something that it just hadn't crossed my mind. You know, they're like, you're a Midwesterner. How did you not get it? You need to be polite. But so that's my piece of advice as well. Always say thank you. People will remember that. Well, they'll actually remember if you don't say thank you more than if you did. So if you want their help in the future, that's a good way to go about it.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think we heard about informational interviews at the last panel. So for those of you who weren't there, it seems like a really important advice to take when you're looking for, or when you're job hunting. So what would you say is the benefit or downsides of a career in science policy over being a professor?
So I went and got my PhD not planning on being a professor. And I think I was probably the only student in my program who went in not planning to pursue an academic career. And I thought long and hard about this. I started my college career planning to be a PI. I wanted to solve the world's organ transplant shortage with stem cells. So I had like a very focused, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I want to be. And I think for me, the benefit of having the opportunity to engage in a huge range of areas is somebody who's like a sponge. I'm so curious. There are so many fascinating things in the world. It upsets me that I'll never know more than, you know, the most superficial layer about a million different priorities. I have a neighbor that's an electrical engineer for Toyota, and we talk about all kinds of crazy stuff that I never would have thought about, but I love learning about new things. So for me, I'm constantly learning about new science, and like I said, I don't have a background in entomology, but now I'm learning as much as I can, as quickly as I can. I lobbied for social scientists for many years, so I've learned a lot about that space, and even more specific disciplines that I've worked in, even though I was just doing the lobbying. Like, it's fascinating to me how all of these different professions contribute to the world and why what they're looking for support in is important. So if you love learning, this is a great career. And instead of being really, really deep in one area, you get to be broad in a wide range of scientific areas, as well as the sort of skills that you need to be successful doing it. So that's my small pitch. And you don't have to write grants most of the time, though that's still working its way back into my job description. I'm like, wait. This is why I didn't want to be a PI.
Yeah, you don't have to write grants, or sometimes you do, but often like briefing memos and things like that, or letters, official correspondence. But I think for me, the benefit that I have, that I feel, you know, being in a civil servant, is that the work that I do, I can see the outcome of it. Like, what did you eat for breakfast or lunch today? I'm sure it was cleared through my program, right? So just any mango fruit you've got right now is coming from Peru, or from, I think, is it Guatemala? Oh, no, we have a huge thing in Costa Rica. Huge Costa Rica exports coming up here. So, you know, whereas my research that I did was so interesting. I mean, I love organisms. I was out running around South Africa, catching these long-tongued horseflies and discovering new parts of mountains and new flowers and things. but I couldn't tell you how it was important to the average person. And there's no ambiguity now as to how important my work is to the average person. So that is something that I hold on to as, just really inspiring to me. But again, I'm also just kind of problems present themselves. Like I had trade issues with bees. So then I learned all about bees and how bees are raised and transported. I end up reading the animal health code at the for veterinarians, and they actually have a whole section on bees, even though our veterinary services people think they only deal with things with backbones, and in fact only really mammals. Actually they do fish, but they're like, bees, that's your stuff, they're bugs and it's not a pest. So I think earthworms was something that was crazy. Earthworms raised in a lab for vermiculture, so they're animals, but veterinary services doesn't want anything to do with them. And I called Fish and Wildlife, and they consider them domesticated because they're being raised in a lab. So it's like, how do we regulate it? And we end up having to regulate it based on the soil that they ingest, so that we could then trade it to Canada, because this guy was all about his vermicompost. It's the best stuff in the world. But it's always these little problems that are coming up, and you just learn about everything. I know more about viruses now, and all the different kinds of oxysporum that, and just how complicated it is with like, bananas, but then also cotton, and just everything that I never thought that I would ever learn. When I was at UC Davis doing my degree and ended up focusing on entomology, it's a huge ag school, and so is Riverside. But I never really thought about any kind of plant science or any of those issues. I think my biggest association with plant science in UCR was that movie that they filmed in the avocado groves in the Botanic Garden, or the Arboretum, is the avocado, what is it? Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death. If you haven't seen it, you should look it up. You'll see our library and everything. They filmed a lot of it in Physics 2000, if that still exists.
So, one thing you just said reminded me of sort of big picture science policy, which is that a lot of times policies get created and introduced, and then you learn what the unintended consequences were when somebody else has problems. And so talking about the bees, I was thinking of when one congressman's office called us and wanted us to go fix a problem related to how the FDA was allowing the administration of antibiotics, because he was a veterinarian, but he's like, I can't write a script for bees. I have no idea what the right level is for a bee to receive antibiotics to prevent colony collapse disorder. So I don't think veterinarians should be charged with this, but under the new guidance to try to reduce antibiotic resistance carte blanche across the nation, that was one of the trickle down effects. And then I was talking to the FDA, trying to be like, all right, you guys need to talk to each other, because I was trying to figure out where in the policy it specifically spells out. And then, okay, what other unintended consequences will this have for other arthropods that we haven't considered yet, and animal husbandry that, impacts our community. So that's, but I never would have learned anything about that topic if I hadn't gotten a phone call about it.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, there's these technicalities, and then there are the ways that things are done. So like crickets are technically animals, but vet services wouldn't have anything to do with them. And in order for this U.S. distributor to ship cricket larvae to Costa Rica, he needs an animal health certificate. And the vet's like, I don't know anything about crickets, but they are technically animals under the WTO, right? So that was a hard one to figure out. But yeah, always something interesting.
Yeah, so what do I do? What is great about my job, I guess? I want Erin and Sheila's jobs now. Being a professor is hard, and can be really, really frustrating. And again, I might not be the best person to talk to you about it, because I don't have this pressure of, oh my God, what am I going to do if I don't get tenure? So, but the best part of of being a professor is students. So that's what keeps me super engaged and involved. And so there are definitely advantages to tenure track. But the future of higher education is I don't know. I don't know what it's. I think it's only going to get harder to find these areas where you're like, yes, this is why I'm doing it. And but yeah, we all do what we have to do.
And your work is perfectly emblematic of the opportunities, but also the challenges with interdisciplinary perspective, opportunities. So you've learned, and I think your work is so cool because it spans that space and it's so unique.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that understanding what the future of sort of convergent research looks like is both an opportunity and a challenge, and how that's going to get funded and what that looks like to others is, I think, a big unknown in higher ed.
Right, because I think the institutions are not set up for it. So everybody's talking about interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary research as being beneficial and high payoff. But it's really actually hard to find NSF funding for it. It's hard to find funding within the university. It's hard to get, recognition for it within your university. Even though that, again, is also changing, it's also becoming part of the P&T promotions. So yeah, it's frustrating. But, and then the thing, like, do you need a PhD to get a great job? That's always the question, right? Or I think that's becoming more and more to the forefront. To make a good life for yourself, do you need a PhD? I don't know. It's harder and harder to answer that question. As long as you love what you're doing in your grad school, just go for it. But the payoff in the end might not quite be what you expected it to be, and that's a little scary.
I loved my graduate work, but I don't need a PhD to do what I'm doing now. And, a lot of my colleagues, they started working at the ports right out of high school. And they're right there with me. So I guess it depends. I don't regret it at all. I don't, because I had a lot of really great experiences, and I think I learned a lot about that have made me successful where I am. But yeah, it's not somebody. I think one of the questions was, is it typical to have a postdoc before you work at APHIS? And the answer to that is no. But we do have a lot of PhDs that work with. I work with a lot of PhDs as well.
Yeah, and you will find that most organizations, government relations, leadership does not have any kind of technical background. Most of them have poli-sci degrees. They, did a stint on the Hill and now represent whatever their organization's interests are. I didn't know anybody at the time, so I thought you needed a PhD, and that was a surprise to me that almost everybody I work with in my community on the advocacy side has no technical background whatsoever. But most of them are enthusiastic and passionate people, and I think that carries you a long way. And I don't regret pursuing my PhD either. It does sometimes open doors, and that can be helpful, and it gives me a little bit more credibility, even where I don't deserve it. I've, like I said, been mistaken for a social scientist and an entomologist, and I know just enough to be dangerous at the superficial level, but I'm not a technical expert.
But in certain instances, you actually wish that it was a little different. Like they would actually have scientists in that position. I remember we went to, who are the people that do it all, the malaria net things, like to try to get bed nets to people. Like it was a NGO.
Oh, is it
the UN one?
Yeah, the Nothing But Nets group,
or
right?
something like that. And it's a really big not-for-profit doing great work, but they did not have an entomologist in their team, which is like, what? Like, how can you make decisions about how much to spray and how much, what to do if you don't have an entomologist there? So, hopefully that's changing, right? So.
And I do think as more people find themselves with PhDs who are passionate about trying to change the world, there will be more people in DC that wind up, sort of maybe out competing the non-technical experts for some of these opportunities, just because there will be a surplus. And there are a lot of people interested, and there's a lot of need for expertise.
I guess I need to say in our pest management group, so we have domestic programs that are specific to pests like potato diseases or nematodes or whatever. Those people tend to have at least a master's or PhD. So, I mean, there is a place for it. I wouldn't say chuck it out the window, especially if it's something you're interested in, you know.
And if you look at like NSF, USDA, NIH, most of those agencies are jam-packed full in at least parts of their sectors. USDA is a little bit more complex than some of the other ones, just depending on how the organizations are set up. But there are tons of scientists in DC. So
nerd capital of the world. Yeah. If you want to do AAAS fellow, you have to have a PhD or at least an engineering degree.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's very interesting. So we have 4 minutes left, so I just wanted to close with one last question, which is, what is something you would have wanted to know when you were at our stage based on what you know now?
Very few people wind up doing what they thought they were going to do for their long-term job. And even if you're in academia, what you wind up focusing on might not be what you thought you would be focusing on. My thesis advisor reached out and said, and we were a zebrafish and xenopus lab, so like fish and frogs, that's our bailiwick. But he reached out and said he's doing something new on butterflies, and then has completely left me hanging. I'm like, what could you possibly be modeling related to heart or brain development that is related to butterflies that connects with what the other things he's done previously are? Or if it's something entirely new, I'm still curious. But so I think no matter what you wind up doing, whatever you're doing 30 years from now won't be what you thought you were doing, even if you think you follow your map to a T. And that's part of the fun of life, right? So I think I've always been so focused. I had my little path, and I thought that I would tread along it, and everything's been entirely different, and it's been fantastic because of it.
For me, my advice would be to really be careful of imposter syndrome. I mean, I think I could have done this tenure track thing from the beginning, but I was like, oh, it seems like a lot of work, and I want to be, there for my kids and all that stuff. I don't know. And I think a big part of that was just imposter syndrome talking. So be really aware of that. Trust yourself. Talk to people you trust about what, about your ideas. Talk it through. But believe in yourself, and do what you love to do. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've realized maybe when I went over from Fulbright is the people running the program, there were people that were just like me, and people that run contests, or even your professor, whatever, those people in positions of authority, they're just like you. So don't. I mean, I think that goes in line with the imposter syndrome. It's like I think it can't really be a valid thing if 80% of people feel like they don't belong. There's you just have to. I mean, it's really hard to fight that. I understand. So I guess I wish I knew more about self-compassion when I was in graduate school. And it's something actually that part of my leadership training work I'm doing right now, it's a major focus of my coaching, is self-compassion. And, that's not just, sort of woo-woo kind of thing. I mean, Harvard Business School or Harvard Business Review they published an article recently, with studies showing that self-compassionate leaders are better leaders. So do remember to think about yourself as a friend. And sometimes it's hard to do, but yes, you need to be your own friend as well as other people. So if you find yourself saying things to yourself that you wouldn't say to your friend, take a step back.
Thank you so much. That was really, I learned so much, and I'm really happy that I was able to moderate this. So we are at 11:30, so thank you to our audience. I'll send a follow-up email next week. And thank you to our panelists so much for your time and energy. I know it's so busy right now, so.
Yeah, it's an honor to be invited, seriously.
Go Highlanders, yes.
Yay! Do they still play the bagpipes over by the? They do.
I think Dr.
remember,
Che does that. He plays the bagpipes. Yeah, we have a professor. He plays it for the graduation, so that's